The situation with Papoose and Claressa Shields has already reached the moment nobody wanted to talk about out loud. And I need you to sit with that for a second before we go any further. Because what happened over the last stretch of days is not a couple, it is not a relationship in transition, and it is definitely not what the public was being sold when the cameras were rolling on The Breakfast Club and Tamron Hall and every other polished sit-down where the two of them showed up holding hands and smiling like the story was already written. What happened is a woman who is supposed to be one of the most disciplined athletes on the planet spent an entire weekend, on Father's Day of all weekends, arguing with commenters, subtweeting bloggers, going back and forth with content creators, and posting the kind of emotional messages that people around her should have quietly walked her away from. And the man who is supposed to be standing next to her, the man whose name is literally on her body in ink, said absolutely nothing. Nothing on his page. Nothing in her comments. No repost. No shout-out. No defense. And that silence, that specific silence during that specific weekend, is louder than anything either one of them has ever said in an interview. Because the story everybody has been watching on television is not the story that has been playing out on the timeline. And once you see the gap between those two stories, you cannot unsee it. This is not about who is right and who is wrong in some petty online argument. This is about a woman who built one of the greatest boxing resumes in the history of the sport, now being forced to defend a relationship that a lot of people were already suspicious of, while the man at the center of it goes about his week like her frustration is somebody else's problem to solve. And when we get to the part where we break down the reported $8 million fight structure, and I promise you we are getting there, you are going to understand why every single one of these public outbursts might be costing her a lot more than a bad news cycle. Because there is a version of this story where this is just messy internet drama, and there is a version of this story where this is a career at a crossroads dressed up as a love story. And I am about to show you which version we are actually living in. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Let me lay the whole board out for you, because if you have only been catching pieces of this on TikTok or in random comment sections, you are missing about 70% of what is actually going on. Claressa Shields is one of the greatest boxers this country has ever produced, a two-time Olympic gold medalist, undisputed at multiple weight classes, a woman who has genuinely done for women's boxing what almost nobody else has been able to do. That is the resume. That is the foundation. Nothing that happens on Instagram takes any of that away, and I want to be very clear about that from the jump, because we are not here to tear down her accomplishments. We are here to talk about the choices being made around those accomplishments right now. On the other side of this, you have Papoose, a New York rapper who has been in the game for a very long time, who built his early reputation on being one of the most technical lyricists on the mixtape circuit, and who has been publicly known for most of his career as the husband of Remy. That marriage was not a rumor. That marriage was not a phase. That was a defining part of his public identity for well over a decade. And the tattoos, the interviews, the songs, the loyalty narrative during Remy's incarceration, all of that was baked into who he was as a public figure. So when Claressa and Papoose started appearing in public together, holding hands, doing joint interviews, showing up on couples panels, that was not a small pivot. That was a full identity reset for him and a completely new chapter for her. And the culture noticed immediately. Some people were rooting for it. Some people were skeptical from day one. And some people, especially in New York, made it very clear they were not interested in accepting it, because Remy is treated in that city like royalty, and any hint of disrespect toward her is going to get answered fast. That is the environment this relationship was born into. And if you do not understand that environment, you cannot understand why every single move they make gets analyzed the way it does. Now add on top of that the fact that reports have circulated for months that the divorce with Remy has not been finalized. Add on top of that the allegations, which have been repeated across multiple platforms without being fully verified, that his belongings may still be at his wife's home. Add on top of that the widely discussed quote where he reportedly said, "Keep my wife's name out your mouth." And now you have a situation where the woman he is publicly dating is walking into a spotlight. That was never fully cleared for her. That is the stakes. Not just relationship stakes, career stakes, cultural stakes, and industry stakes. Because when a woman with an 8-figure fight deal on the table starts arguing with bloggers on Father's Day weekend, the question is not whether she is allowed to be frustrated. The question is what she is actually frustrated about, and whether the people around her are protecting her from making that frustration public in a way that could genuinely cost her real money. And that is the question this whole video is built around. So let us start with what everybody actually saw with their own eyes. Because before we get into industry breakdowns and business dynamics, we have to lay out the surface layer. And the surface layer alone is already damning enough. The first piece of evidence is the timeline itself. This entire back and forth exploded over Father's Day weekend. That is not a small detail. That is the detail. Father's Day is one of those weekends where public figures who are in stable, secure relationships tend to do one of two things. They either post something quiet and personal that celebrates the family unit they are part of, or they stay off the internet entirely and enjoy the day. What they typically do not do is spend 72 hours in a running comment war with strangers on the internet. And yet that is exactly what the timeline shows happened. Post after post. Reaction after reaction. Reply after reply. And, on the other side of that timeline, from the man whose presence would have shut most of this down in one screenshot, there was nothing. No public gesture. No visible support. No, that's my lady, back off. Just silence. And when you're dealing with a public relationship that has been sold to the audience as this deep, ride-or-die connection, silence during the exact weekend when partnership is most visible is not neutral. Silence is a statement. The second piece of surface evidence is the content of the posts themselves. This was not one carefully worded response to a specific piece of misinformation. This was a spread, a wide, emotional, scattered spread of reactions that hit bloggers, hit commentators, hit content creators, hit random accounts. And a lot of people watching in real time noticed that the tone kept escalating instead of settling. That is a very specific kind of online behavior. And anybody who has spent time watching public figures navigate controversy knows exactly what it looks like. It looks like someone who is not being managed. It looks like someone who is not being talked off the ledge by the people around her. It looks like someone whose team, whether that is management, PR, or the partner she is publicly attached to, is not stepping in to say, we are going to sit this one out. And I want to be honest with you, that alone tells you something about the infrastructure around this relationship. Because a woman with her earning potential should not be spending Father's Day weekend arguing with a comment section. Somebody should be closing the laptop. The third piece of surface evidence, and this one is honestly one of the funniest and saddest details in the whole story, is the orange hair. If you have not seen it, Claressa recently debuted a new orange hairstyle, and this happened shortly after Remy had been rapping about orange hair in one of her recent verses. Now, could that be a total coincidence? Sure, technically, anything can be a coincidence. But when the internet notices a pattern that's specific, that fast, you have to at least acknowledge that the optics are brutal. And the optics were brutal. People immediately started making comparisons, immediately started dragging the hairstyle into the broader narrative of why does it feel like there is always a Remy-shaped shadow over this relationship? And once that comparison locked in, it did not go away. Every new post got filtered through it. Every new reaction got tied back to it. And that is the danger of building a public relationship inside somebody else's spotlight. You do not get to pick which comparisons stick. The fourth piece of surface evidence is what was happening on the other side of the timeline while all of this was unfolding. Because while Claressa was in the comment section, Remy was having what can only be described as one of the best public stretches of her recent career. A song with French Montana and Max be reportedly climbing to the top of the charts. Appearances all over New York during the Knicks playoff run, which if you know anything about New York culture right now, is the epicenter of celebrity attention. Hosting morning shows, attending premieres. And on top of all of that, a movie she was involved in premiered that same weekend, and viewers were reportedly praising it, calling out a twist that caught them by surprise. So on one side of the split screen, you have Remy stacking wins in the exact city that both she and Papoose are historically tied to. And on the other side of the split screen, you have Claressa in a comment war with strangers. That contrast, whether it was intended or not, became the visual story of the weekend. And the internet does not need a caption to read a split screen like that. And oh, do I have more for you? Because if you thought the surface stuff was rough, wait until we get into the insider layer. Because this is where the whole thing stops looking like a bad weekend and starts looking like a pattern. I want the people in the comments who have been defending this relationship for months to really pay attention to this next section. Because we are about to talk about the moments that the cameras did not catch, the moments the interviews did not cover, and the small, telling details that people close to this situation have been quietly pointing to for a long time now. And I'm going to say something that a lot of Claressa's most loyal supporters are not going to want to hear. Some of the smartest voices in this culture have been trying to warn her, in their own way, for a while now. And the warnings have been getting louder. Stay with me. Because when we connect the tattoo, the interview quotes, and the reported lyric about backdooring, you are going to see why so many people believe the story was never going to end the way she was told it would. Let us start with the tattoo situation, because this is one of those details that seems small until you actually stop and think about it. Claressa has publicly shown a tattoo connected to Papoose. That is a permanent, physical commitment. That is ink on skin that does not come off with a screenshot deletion. Papoose, on the other hand, has long had a tattoo associated with his wife. Now, supporters of the current relationship will say people are reading too much into this, that tattoos from previous eras are not automatically evidence of anything. And that is a fair counterargument on paper. But here is where the counterargument falls apart. In a relationship where the public perception is already fragile, where the divorce has reportedly not been finalized, where the wife has reportedly addressed the situation publicly, the visible imbalance between one partner marking themselves for a relationship that has not been fully cleared and the other partner still carrying marks from the relationship that has not been formally closed is not nothing. It is a visual imbalance that mirrors the emotional imbalance a lot of people are already sensing. And when insiders talk about this relationship privately, that is one of the details that keeps coming up. The second piece of cultural evidence is the pattern of interview appearances versus everyday visibility. When there is a camera involved, when there is a major media hit lined up, when there is a moment that is going to be seen by millions of people, Papoose is reportedly right there. Smiling, posing, holding her hand, playing the role. Tamron Hall, The Breakfast Club, the couple's panel energy. All of that has been well documented. But critics and people close to the situation have been quietly pointing out for months that outside of those staged moments, the everyday relationship visibility is not there in the way you would expect. The casual repost, the random supportive comment, the birthday message, the Father's Day acknowledgement, the small stuff, the stuff that people in real, secure relationships do without thinking about it, because it is just the natural rhythm of being connected to somebody. That rhythm has not been there. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it either. The public relationship shows up when there is a stage. The private relationship, whatever it actually is, seems to operate on a completely different schedule. The third piece of cultural evidence is the reported lyric. Papoose posted a rap clip during this same window, where he reportedly talked about backdooring people, and included the line about, "Your girl will backdoor you." Now artists rap. Artists write bars. Artists say things in songs that are not always meant to be personal. That is real. And I am not going to sit here and pretend every single lyric is a coded message. But when you drop a lyric like that during the exact stretch of days that your public partner is having a very public emotional weekend, and when your public partner has been the subject of nonstop speculation about the security of the relationship, the timing itself becomes a message. People online split immediately on how to read it. Some viewers took it as a subtle jab, a signal, a message. Others saw it as just music, just wordplay, just a bar. But the fact that the debate even existed, the fact that the fan base had to argue about whether their partner was subtweeting them in a song, tells you exactly how unstable the public perception of this relationship has become. The fourth piece of cultural evidence, and this is the one that I think is the most telling, is the reported quote about the ring and about living together. Multiple times in multiple interviews, Papoose has reportedly said things along the lines of, "Oh no, never a ring," and "Oh no, not living together." Now, supporters will say those quotes are being taken out of context, that they were jokes, that they were misinterpreted. That is the defense. But here is the problem with the defense. Even if those exact framings are being read too aggressively, the pattern of him not publicly committing to the traditional next step markers of a serious relationship is not a rumor. It is on tape. It is in interviews. It is in the record. And when a woman has your name tattooed on her body, and you are on national television saying you are not doing rings, and you are not doing living together, the audience is going to draw conclusions from that. And those conclusions are not going to be favorable. That is not the audience being cruel. That is the audience listening to what a public figure said with his own mouth. Now, I know some of you are going to say, well, some people just do not believe in marriage, and that is valid. And I hear you. And in a vacuum, that is a completely reasonable position. But we are not in a vacuum. We are in a situation where one person is publicly declaring commitment, and the other person is publicly declining the traditional structures of it. And that asymmetry is the thing everybody is reacting to. And now I need to shift gears completely, because so far we have been talking about relationships and culture and optics, and all of that is real, but all of that is also the surface. The real story, the story that almost nobody in the mainstream commentary space is willing to talk about, is a business story. And once you understand the business story, everything else in this video starts to make a different kind of sense. So let me pivot hard, because this is the part of the video where we stop talking about who is dating who and start talking about what is actually on the table financially, structurally, and career-wise, because that is where the real stakes live. The reported figure that has been floating around Claressa Shields' most recent deal is roughly $8 million. That is the number that has been repeated across multiple outlets and social platforms. And Claressa herself has publicly suggested she expects to earn even more than that in the near future. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a woman at the top of her game, and in many ways she is. But here's the thing about boxing deals at that level that a lot of casual fans do not fully understand. The money is almost never fully guaranteed up front. Boxing is not the NBA. Boxing is not the NFL. There are no fully guaranteed multi-year contracts sitting in a vault waiting to pay out no matter what. A large chunk of that reported $8 million is, according to how these deals are typically structured and according to what has been reported in this specific case, tied to fights that have to actually happen, fights that have to get announced, fights that have to get promoted, fights that have to get sanctioned, fights that have to draw. And every single one of those steps has to go smoothly for the full value of the deal to actually land in her bank account. That is angle one, and it is the angle that changes everything, because it means that the health of her public brand is not a vanity issue. It is a revenue issue. Angle two is the promotional ecosystem itself. In boxing, promoters and networks and streaming partners make decisions based on drawing power and on risk. When they look at a fighter, they're not just looking at record and skill. They're looking at whether that fighter can headline a card, whether that fighter can move pay-per-view buys, whether that fighter can generate positive press in the lead up to a fight, and whether that fighter is going to bring stability or chaos to the promotion cycle. This is not personal. This is just how the business works. And when a fighter is spending Father's Day weekend in a comment war instead of building fight anticipation, when a fighter is publicly tied to a relationship narrative that keeps generating negative headlines, and when the reported public back and forth involving figures like Alicia Baumgardner adds another layer of this is being settled online instead of in the ring, some promoters and business partners quietly get nervous. They do not always say it out loud. They do not always announce it. But they start hedging. They start delaying. They start restructuring. And a fight announcement that everybody expected to drop on a specific date that suddenly does not drop is one of the most reliable signals in the sport that somebody upstairs is recalculating the risk. Angle 3, and this is the one that ties everything together, is the ripple effect on everyone connected to the fighter. If major fights get delayed or restructured or, in the worst case, do not happen, the financial hit does not stop with the fighter. It hits trainers. It hits management. It hits promotional partners. It hits sponsors. And in a situation where the fighter's public partner is a rapper who has, according to online chatter, been connected to some of the same business orbit, some commentators have speculated that a slowdown in her career could carry financial implications on his side as well. Now, I want to be very clear. There is no public confirmation of any specific financial arrangement between them, and I am not going to pretend there is. But the general principle that a public partner's career struggles can ripple into your own opportunities is not speculation. That is just how proximity to a brand works in this industry. And when you put all three of those angles together, the deal is not fully guaranteed, the promotional ecosystem is watching the drama, and the ripple effect touches everybody in the circle. You start to understand why so many people are quietly asking whether the person who should be most invested in keeping her focused, keeping her calm, and keeping her off the timeline is not doing that job. Because the cost of not doing that job is not measured in bad tweets. It is measured in canceled cards, delayed announcements, and a deal structure that quietly stops paying out. And here is the reveal that I have been building toward this entire video. The thing that once you see it, you will not be able to look at this situation the same way ever again. The public story we have all been sold is that this is a love story with some outside noise. The public story is that two people found each other in a difficult moment and are trying to build something real while the world watches. That is the framing. That is the packaging. But the evidence, when you actually line it up piece by piece, tells a very different story. The evidence tells the story of a woman who is doing all of the public commitment work, the tattoo, the interviews, the couples panels, the emotional defense on social media, and a man who is publicly declining the traditional markers of that same commitment, staying silent during the moments that matter most, dropping lyrics that at minimum create ambiguity, and continuing to carry the visual and reported markers of a marriage that has reportedly not been formally closed. That is not a partnership in balance. That is a partnership where one person is carrying almost all of the public weight of the relationship, while the other person appears to be, allegedly, and according to critics, keeping his options and his identity strategically open. And the truth bomb, the thing that a lot of people in the culture have been dancing around, but not saying directly, is that this pattern is not new for successful women in the public eye. This pattern is old. This pattern is documented. This pattern is what happens when a high-earning woman becomes emotionally attached to a partner who benefits enormously from the association without ever having to fully commit to the structure of the association. And when the emotional imbalance starts affecting the business, when Father's Day weekend becomes a comment war, when fight announcements start slipping, when promoters start hedging, the woman is the one who pays the price, not the partner. That is the pattern. That is the reveal. And that is why so many people who care about Claressa's legacy are watching this situation with genuine concern, not with entertainment. Because a career of her caliber does not deserve to become a footnote in somebody else's relationship arc allegedly, reportedly, and based on everything that has been playing out publicly. This is exactly the trajectory a lot of insiders quietly feared this would take, and the fact that it is playing out on a Father's Day weekend of all weekends is not a coincidence. It is the loudest version of the quiet warning people have been giving for months. Now here is where I want to bring it back to something hopeful, because I do not want to leave this video in a place of pure critique, and I do not want anybody watching this to think for a second that Claressa Shields' story ends here. It does not. It cannot. Because a woman who has done what she has done in the ring, a woman who has broken the records she has broken, a woman who has carried an entire division of the sport on her back for years, is not defined by one bad weekend, and she is not defined by one relationship. She is defined by the work. She is defined by the discipline. She is defined by the fact that when she steps between the ropes, she still does the job at 100% every time without excuses. And that part of her resume is not going anywhere no matter what happens on Instagram. And I think it is important to say that clearly, because the point of a video like this is not to tear a great athlete down. The point of a video like this is to hold up the mirror and say, the person we are watching in the comment section is not the person we are watching in the ring. And that gap is what needs to close. Because the version of Claressa Shields who trains, who fights, who wins, who represents her city and her sport at the highest level, that version of her is still the winner in this entire story. That version of her does not need to argue with bloggers. That version of her does not need to prove anything to a comment section. That version of her does not need a cosign from a partner who cannot be bothered to post on Father's Day. That version of her is already, on her own, one of the greatest to ever do it. And every time she steps back into the gym, every time she steps back onto a scale, every time she steps back into an arena, she's going to remind everyone of that. The relationship stuff is noise. The tattoos are noise. The comment wars are noise. The record is not noise. The record is permanent. One person spends their weekend fighting with strangers online. The other person spends their weekend building a legacy that outlives every single one of those posts. And when the dust settles on all of this, when the current news cycle burns itself out and the next one takes over, the thing that is going to be left standing is the work. It always is. It always has been. That is the part of this story that nobody can take away from her, no matter how the relationship chapter ends. And I genuinely believe, and I want everybody watching this to hear me clearly on this, that the moment she decides to close the app, walk away from the noise, and put that same energy back into the sport that made her famous in the first place, she becomes untouchable again. Not because the noise goes away. The noise never goes away for people at her level, but because the work speaks louder than the noise every single time, without exception. So what happens next? Because this story is not over. And if you think we have seen the peak of this, you have not been paying attention. There are at least 2 developments I want you tracking closely over the next few weeks. The first is the fight announcement situation. The date everyone was expecting came and went with no official news. And the longer that silence stretches, the more meaningful it becomes. If a fight gets announced in the next stretch of time, we're going to break down exactly what the terms look like and whether the structure has quietly shifted from what was originally reported. If a fight does not get announced, we are going to break down what that silence is really telling us about the state of her business right now. Either way, you are going to want to be here for that conversation. The second development to watch is Papoose's next public move. Because after a silence this loud during a weekend this visible, whatever he does next, whether he posts, whether he stays quiet, whether he addresses it directly, whether he lets another lyric do the talking, is going to tell us exactly where he actually stands. And I promise you we're going to be watching, we're going to be breaking it down in real time. And if you want to be in the room, when that breakdown happens you already know what to do. Hit that subscribe button if you have not yet, turn on the notification bell. So you do not miss the next drop. Drop a comment below telling me whether you think Claressa needs to close the app and get back in the gym, or whether you think she is right to defend herself publicly. and share this video with somebody who has been sleeping on how deep this story actually goes. And before you click off, I want to put one more thing in front of you, because there is a piece of this whole Remy Ma versus Claressa situation that connects directly to a bigger New York power dynamic that almost nobody is talking about. A dynamic involving who actually controls the borough's cultural spotlight right now, who is quietly being pushed out of it, and why one specific phone call reportedly happened during the Knicks celebrations that could reshape the entire conversation. That is the next video. You do not want to miss it. Click it as soon as this one ends. This is your boy signing off. Stay safe, stay locked in, and I will see you in the next one.